Thank you. The automation of behavioral science. I'm certain that my advisor is not too happy with me right now. I'm an academic and originally and have brought academia to business. I'm a psychologist, and I actually started in this industry in the late 90s, and I was an analyst, and I was analyzing survey data, creating reports out of data from questions that we asked respondents. What's most important to you? Why did you do what you do? What drives your behavior? All of these questions. And I had a psychology major as an undergrad, and I was looking at this data. I was like, forgive me, this is garbage. We're not really getting what is driving people's behavior. And at that point, I thought, if I really want to make an impact on this industry, I need to understand human decision-making more deeply. And so I decided to go back to graduate school. And when I got to graduate school, I started to learn about automaticity. Anybody familiar with that word, automaticity? Yeah, anybody familiar with System 1? You've probably heard that. Yeah, that's automaticity, the automatic associations in our mind, the things that happen in our mind automatically without our conscious control. I read this paper. It was called The Unbearable Automaticity of Being by Tanya Chartrand and John Barsh. Yeah, they sexualized it. It was really interesting. Fascinating paper. And I started to learn things like, my response to an overall satisfaction question on my life. How satisfied am I with my life? 0 to 10. My answer to that question depended on whether it was raining out that day or not. I learned that the degree to which I felt somebody's personality was warm or not was dependent on whether I'd been holding a cup of iced coffee or a cup of warm, hot coffee. And I started to think, gosh, the influence of the non-conscious is much more pervasive than I originally had thought. So I started to study it, and I started to study emotion. And I got very excited about it. But when you look at automaticity and the nature of automaticity, I think it's actually very instructive to do some exercises just to illustrate how we feel automatically without our conscious control. An old social psychology trick is to ask people not to think of a white bear. And what happens when somebody says, don't think of a white bear? What automatically comes to mind? Yeah, a white bear. Really, don't think about white bears. It automatically comes to mind. So let's do this emotionally. Don't feel good. Don't feel scared. Don't feel good. Don't feel scared. Don't feel good. Don't feel scared. Can I go back one? You're going to get to see that again. So some of those are hardwired, and they happen for us naturally. Others are learned associations in the rearview mirror there. That's a learned association. But it happens automatically, right? And when you hear that siren, what happens? Anxiety occurs in your body. You start to sweat in your palms. And it really illustrates, I think, when you look at those extremes, those things that evoke emotions in us, the nature of automaticity really well. But it also happens at a much more middle of the distribution range. We react emotionally to things that are subtly evocative, as well as those extremes. And so when you think about automaticity, think about spreading neural network associations. This is an illustration of it here, just kind of to inspire you. But when you think about automaticity, I want to think about it in these terms. Automaticity is necessary for us. Automaticity, the automation of all that processing, actually gives rise to sentience. It's the foundation for our System 2 thinking. If we didn't have System 1, we wouldn't have the luxury of sentience. It's necessary, and it precedes System 2. It goes a little bit deeper than that. Sentience is the foundation for empathy. Once we become sentient, we actually can have empathy for the human condition. And automaticity is the foundation for that. So automaticity, the spreading natural associations in your mind, really enable empathy. Without automaticity, we wouldn't have empathy for the human condition. Automaticity precedes System 2. It precedes and is the foundation for sentience. I'm going to come back to that theme in a bit. So what do we have for technologies that can actually capture that automatic human response? You're probably familiar with implicit associations. Maybe you've heard of that. You may be familiar with biometrics and EEG. Eye tracking and facial coding are other technologies that can capture the automatic human response. And I'll do a couple here. Biometrics, there's a lot of different kinds. This one may be an illustration of how much you're sweating in your palms. So when you think about biometrics and capturing the automatic human response, is your phobia of snakes greater than your phobia of spiders? If I measure how much you're sweating in your palms when I show you images like snakes and spiders, I can get a sense of how scared you actually are of those objects. But biometrics happen primarily in the lab. There's another technology that you can actually do right now on your smartphones. This is called implicit association testing, and it's done through Sentient Prime. This is actually one talk where it's okay for you to be on your smartphone. If you go to bit.ly/IIeX 2017, you'll get to see this little experiment. This is a true implicit association test, and you can do it on your phone. It's kind of fun. We're going to show you a little video of it here while you do it on your phones. In this exercise, you're going to see there's a natural approach and avoidance swiping that happens. We're going to sort positive emotions towards you, and you're going to sort negative emotions away from you. And the technology is going to time you to see how long it takes you to make those judgments. It's essentially creating a baseline because everybody has a different natural speed. Then primes are going to be introduced. It's a psychology experiment. And so we're interested in how those primes influence your ability to make a separate emotional judgment. I heard somebody's in already. If the prime is consistent with the judgment you have to make, you're able to make that judgment more quickly. It facilitates your judgment. If the prime is inconsistent with the judgment you have to make, it takes you longer and you make more errors. It's something we call cognitive dissonance. This is an indirect, non-controllable, non-deliberate measure of how you feel about these primes. They automatically activate your mind, and that automatic activation influences your ability to make those judgments. From a market research perspective, this is really breakthrough because it's globally scaled. You can do this on any smartphone in the world. You don't have to bring somebody into the lab to measure their automatic emotional response. If you go through that test, you'll get some nice feedback on, oh, somebody's doing it, there's the cop. You'll get some nice feedback on how you feel positive or negative towards those different stimuli. So that's a technology that actually measures automaticity. But there's a link between automaticity and automation in market research. There's a reason why those words use the same base. Automation in market research is really important for us. Here are some examples of current automation in market research. So I think we're all probably using these to some degree. If you've read the latest GRIT report, automation is a major trend. The survey question design is an example of automation in our industry. Push-button question types, that's automation. That's really useful. Decipher is doing a wonderful job there. Many others are as well. Dashboard reporting, so automating the reporting of our results. Dapracy is doing a really good job in this space. We've now entered the phase of full study design automation. And Zappy is a nice leader in this place, doing a really good job of automating the entire study design for brands, concept packages, more. And tracking and analysis is another example of where we're seeing automation in market research. Bera brand management is really a nice leader in this space. I'm going to show you an example of that platform and how it automates not only the reporting, but the analysis of results. So this is a brand tracking platform that measures over 4,000 brands in 200 sectors here in the US on a weekly basis. So that data is all in a single database. And the presentation of that data is quite elegant. You can see in this video here, if I want to do an analysis of Verizon's position on the brand love curve, I can sort, I can filter, and it's fun to do as well. This is an automated regression analysis that's filtered by a population. If I change the filter, the regression analysis updates automatically. and it gives me insights directly on what I need to do as a brand manager. The attributes that I own that are important, those that I lack that are important, and those that I really shouldn't attend to. That's all been automated in a reporting system, and it's tracked weekly over time. All of that automation gives insights professionals cognitive capacity to focus on empathy for our clients and their customers. Let me do some more. That's automation currently in the market research industry on sort of traditional standard explicit questions. What about the automation of behavioral science techniques? Are we doing anything in that space? I'll point out a couple of great examples. I'm not sure if anybody's using Sticky, just recently acquired by Toby, one of the original investors in Sticky. I came across this about 4 years ago at a conference, and they had taken eye tracking out of the lab and put it online. And I thought, this is perfect. We need scalable, global methods that can measure people's attention. When we first started using the system, I hope they're not mad at me for saying this, but the usable data was only 5%. Like send 100 people through and you only got usable data on 5 people. I said, I'll take it. Over the course of the last 3 years, that number's gone up to 30, 40% of usable data. That's innovation in our space, people taking risks where it wasn't perfect at first, but we've innovated, we've learned, and we've improved over time. Global, mobile, global, online eye tracking, a nice advance in our industry. Here's another one. Realize is doing a great job, and many others in the facial coding space. This is the measurement of how you express emotion on your face while you're presented with some kind of stimulus. And then I'm going to focus again on sentient prime. This is an implicit association task, which essentially is thousands of mini experiments that are created and run on your smartphone. If you were just doing that task, sorting emotions left and right, you can, with sentient prime, now create a scientifically valid, true implicit study in a matter of minutes, get a link and distribute it to your respondents. And it's an experiment. It's not a question of how you feel about things. It's actually a scientific experiment that's been automated. When we were doing this about 5 years ago, we were playing around with the gamification of the technology, and we threw it to the analyst staff. You probably remember Jeremiah doing this, a great analyst at our company. And I said, just play around with it, try to break it, whatever. And so he started playing around with the system, and he was throwing in images of politicians and images of robots. He thought it was clever that the technology's name was Prime, so he put in a picture of Optimus Prime. But then he created the continuum. Instead of positive negative, it was robotic versus not robotic. And so he started testing whether politicians were viewed as robotic versus not robotic. And I looked at that and watched him do that, and I thought, oh goodness, this actually is bigger than market research. This is a technology that enables anybody to measure how their friends feel about any stimulus without asking them any questions. And if we can understand how our friends feel about other stimulus, we actually can have greater empathy for their condition. This is a technology that increases cognitive capacity, enabling us to have greater empathy for the human condition. It's 1,000 mini experiments in the palm of your hand. How do all these things come together? From a market research perspective, imagine if we could combine eye tracking and facial coding and implicit associations and choice studies in a single research design. Well, we can. And here's an example from a client of ours, Smirnoff. I love this case study because it's an illustration of how a brand is trying to use their marketing communications to make a change on how people feel towards others. They're trying to make people feel more inclusive. And this is the story of Chris Fonseca, who is deaf, and he teaches other people who are deaf how to dance.
There's not many teachers out there who can teach a deaf person how to hear music.
Everybody feel bounce, everybody feel move. Mr. Young, Mr. Young, in a dancing juice. Everybody to the. We are in a car loop, stepping up, stepping up. Watch me now, watch me now, watch me now, watch me now. Watch me now, no.
I love that ad. Now watch this. This is the integration of eye tracking, facial coding, implicit association testing, and choice-based conjoint in a single study. It's all automated. The line is the affect, the valence that people feel while they're watching the ad. The heat map is what they're attending to. You can see the benchmarks appear on the bottom, where they rank in terms of overall the database, their percentile rank. This ad ranks in the 83rd percentile for attention, the 26th percentile for affect, the 47th percentile for memory, and the 96th percentile for desirability. It had a big impact on preference for the Smirnoff brand. And that's all automated behavioral science. If we can automate the science, the insights professionals can talk about what it means and inspire action in our clients. This ad did something more than just boost the Smirnoff brand. It actually changed people's attitudes towards other people. This is the control group that weren't exposed to the ad. These are associations towards other groups of people. 100 is neutral on this, by the way. That's actually a little bit disturbing. After a single exposure to that ad, here are the non-conscious associations in memory towards other groups of people. They rise almost across the board. So I want to finish with this note and talk about automation from a different perspective. When I think about automation, I love Zappy's new positioning, like we heart MR. Have you seen that positioning by Appy? We heart MR, because automation is supposed to be the anti-MR, right? It's not. Automation enables us to have greater empathy. It frees up our cognitive capacity. So when you think about automaticity for the human mind, giving rise to sentient, automaticity or automation in the market research industry really gives insights to professionals the luxury of sentience. Because the more we automate, the greater our capacity for empathizing with the human condition. Thank you.